we've got a problem. We have a box, the gearbox we've been having a lot of trouble with. What's been happening is the input shaft in here has got some play in it. The output shaft has been resonating during shutdown and causing the shaft to break a retaining ring. If we take the box apart, we have two things that we need to cure. First thing we need to do is take this shaft out. We notice that inside the box there is a ring slot inside the box here, which happens to hold this rear bearing. What's happening is this front bearing is not locked in, so what we're going to attempt to do is put the same locking bearing that's on the back on the front. The problem that we have, during shutdown the blade is so big that it's acting like a flywheel. The gears are meshing together okay, but it's causing a backlash because of the angle of the gear. After a certain number of times of shutdown, this is tapping against this bearing. It's also tapping against this bearing and causing this lock ring right in here to break, which allows the whole shaft to walk forward, pushing this bearing and the seal outside of the case. So what we're going to attempt to do is we are going to attempt to put this locking groove also here. That way the shaft can't work in and it can't work out. The second problem, the input shaft. Input shaft, the problem we have with this shaft, we've removed the bearing already. We have this gear has a lot of slop to it. We can no longer get parts for this box, so we're going to have to try to make a shaft. Been to a couple of machinists. It's going to cost $400 to build that. I have found that there is a shaft available that fits a tractor. It's a pinion shaft. It's about this long. It has the same type of setup on each end. The spline should be the same. I've ordered it. If the spline is the same and it will fit these gears, all we got to do is take this, put it in the lathe, cut it to length, and turn this down to be able to fit the bearing back on. That's the second problem that we're going to try to accomplish. We've ordered the parts for this particular piece. We have to wait for it to show up and then we'll update. So, the biggest thing today is to try to set up a jig to duplicate this ring on this side. First thing we have to do is make sure that the measurements are going to be exactly the same from this one to this one. If it is, we're going to try to take a cutting wheel, set up a jig that we can use with a Dremel, and be able to take that cutting wheel, set it in, and turn it so that it will make this groove. Then we've got to get the thickness of that groove to the right spot where the lock ring will fit good but not tight. It has to have a little bit of movement because as these boxes heat up from use, everything expands. Well, as everything expands, we don't want to put undue stress on the case by expanding and causing the front of the case to crack. So, if we come in from the front of the case, 0.426 in depth with our wheel, we'll actually have the beginning point of the slot. Now the next point that we have to find is the width of the groove we have to cut. To do that, we need the ring. This is the ring that will go on the bearing and into the case. We measure this. We don't want it a tight fit because the ring wants to be slightly sloppy inside the slot. So we want it a nice loose fit. So we're going to snug it up till it won't move. We're going to relax it and we're just going to wiggle it just a little bit. And we have 0.059. So even if the slot comes out to 0.06, we'll be good. but we don't want it too loose, just enough to hold the bearing in place. So the next project that we have to do is to get this case set up in a jig so that we can cut a slot on this side for this ring to set into, so that when we put the shaft inside both rings, we'll go down into the slots where they're supposed to be. Okay, here I have actually put a bearing into the box exactly where I want that. I've marked that spot where I want that lock ring groove to go with a cutting wheel. Now I've set this bearing into place and closed the box on it to give me a guide to cut by. So we're going to try cutting that groove all the way around that bearing, a little bit at a time, and see if we can get that in the right position for that lock ring. Okay, here's what we've been doing. This to keep the dust and the aluminum from getting into my lungs. Painter's mask or respirator would be good too, but this is a makeshift shop, so there we go. Alright, I've been working in this groove, and you can see where the groove has been cut. By setting the bearing in place and going around very slowly, we're able to get that in. As you can see, I still get to do just a little bit more to try to get this to fit all the way down into this groove. This is how we've been doing it. Can't take out too much at a time. You have to keep refitting. You want us to go all the way in and be a little bit sloppy, like we got the first side of the case. Came out really good. The ring goes all the way in, just a little bit sloppy, and we can turn it without any pressure. And it's down in evenly all the way around. Now we're going to match this side of the case as well to do the same thing. It's not going down in quite so far. If I push, I can see that's deep enough, that's deep enough. Right here we still have a restriction, right in this area. There again, we can't take out too much because we don't want to weaken the case. There we go. Now it goes in, fits, and it turns. Just a little bit of wiggle room. Just exactly what we want. Now we have to fit the shaft. Shaft locks into this side. You can see that the groove now lines up perfectly with the bearing. Now we're going to insert the ring back into the bearing. We have a special set of pliers for that. Now, let's see if it's going to line up and fit right. This unit has to go in here and in there. Has to go all the way in. You can see it's not fitting all the way down in. So we still have some sort of restriction. It's not deep enough on this side. Let's try the other side of the case. Same thing. It's not going in quite all the way. This side is fine. it doesn't look like it's quite lining up. So the slot looks like it's milled right. What we have to do, now that down in here, it's not lining up. So either the slot is at an angle, so we may have to take the bottom slot and angle it a little bit because it looks like it's still touching out here in the front. Looks like it's still got to go just a little bit deeper. Looks like it's lining up okay. The thing we can do is we can bring this one out, see how the inside one is looking. Okay, so we still have a little bit of a depth problem. Somewhere it's not exactly even. Even closer. Depth looks good there. I guess what we have to do now is we're going to have to run a micrometer down into the hole all the way around and find out where the high spot is on both sides. Here's what we've done. We've cut this groove. I don't know if you can see right there. That's the new groove. It's the original. We've done it on both sides of the case. So we've got this one and this one. Now we're going to, now that we've got the bearings set down into place, we're going to try to dry fit both of these. So it goes around this way. Lock ring goes in nice and tight. Bearing fits in good. Now I'm going to put the case together to make sure that the case is going to close up and torque up without cracking, because we want the sides to come together without any pressure on that ring. We set the case together and we notice that there is just a little tiny bit of a gap, and we notice the bearing is in place here, bearing is in place here. Now we need to take a wrench, tighten it up, and make sure that there's no gap in the case at all. If there is, we don't want to over tighten this because we don't want to take a chance on cracking the case. So if there's any gap when we get it snugged up, we know that we still have to take that ring slot and make it a little bit deeper. I'm going to take a ratchet at this point just tighten up the 2 bolts that are around the bearing where we've been working. We know the rest of the case is fine. If this works, and our my theory is correct, when we get done, this case should never have another seal walking loose or the bearing walking. No more grinding on the inside of the case. We'll actually have fixed the original defective design to beef up this box a little bit. I have not torqued this, but I've just hand tightened it. We can see now that there is no gap. The case comes right up nice and tight. We see the bearing is in there nice and tight. Everything turns nice and free. So we have cured the problem. We now have a locking bearing on the back, the original. We have the same locking bearing on the front. That shaft now cannot move one way or the other inside that case. It has to stay right where it is. We have pressure from the propeller pushing backwards. That's what this lock ring is for. Then the resonance of the gears meshing together during shutdown with that big prop doing this kickback against the engine, this lock ring will keep it from working back out this way. So this ring here that has been breaking on a regular basis, we've also widened the groove and put a thicker ring. We probably shouldn't have had to even do that, but I figured a heavier ring locking this bearing into place would cover all the bases, so now we shouldn't have any more problem with the seal coming loose, oil leaking out, or the retaining ring breaking on the inside. Now all we have to do is get the new shaft. We'll be making the new shaft for this end, and when that's done, we should be able to put it back on the plane and take it for a test ride.